Braden Schneider could be primed for a big role with the New York Rangers, and we tell you why he's ready for it.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1387 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Schick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So today, going to go ahead and continue our fun-filled off-season series, best and worst case scenarios, where we basically just lay out all the good things and all the bad things that could happen with every single player that we project to make the Rangers opening night roster, or at least guys that are in the mix to make the opening night roster. And today, very special kind of 3-for-1 deal here. We're going to look at one defenseman, one goalie, and one forward. It's going to be Braden Schneider, Jonathan Quick, and Brett Berard. So without any further ado, let's just dive right into it here. We begin with Braden Schneider, somebody who I think is going to be a very, very important player for the New York Rangers this upcoming season. But as we usually do, we'll alternate. We'll do worst case scenario followed by best case scenario for Braden Schneider, and then we'll move on to Quick and Berard as well. But we begin, like I said, with Schneider here. Worst case scenario for Braden Schneider. I mean, it was kind of hard to come up with a whole bunch that were like really bad because he is, tends to be a pretty consistent and steady player. Obviously, had the injury last season, and that may have limited his effectiveness at least a little bit. But I think in a worst case scenario, we begin to realize that Braden Schneider has sort of hit his ceiling in the NHL, and he is still very young. He debuted at a very young age, but going into the draft, the year that the Rangers took him in the first round, the book on Schneider was that he was something of a floor selection rather than a ceiling selection. This is somebody that you can breathe easy. If you pick him, you got nothing to worry about as far as the dreaded B word, as far as being a bust. He will be somebody that will step into an NHL lineup and do, a pretty solid job. And I think we have certainly seen that. And I'd argue even a little bit more than that from Braden Schneider since he made his NHL debut. But the other part of that was that his ceiling wasn't necessarily as high as some other players that were available in that draft. And I can kind of see that a little bit where we are with Braden Schneider. I mean, I still think he's got another level, at least one more level that he can get to as far as just being a really effective all-around defenseman. But I can see where, watching him for a handful of seasons, I don't know that we're ever looking at Braden Schneider as like a true bona fide superstar, but that's okay, especially with the way the Rangers have drafted in recent years and some of the results that they've gotten on their first round draft picks. I mean, Braden Schneider's looking pretty good because if nothing else, he's become, a cornerstone of Ranger hockey. He's been there the past handful of seasons. He's one of those guys you just kind of pencil him into the lineup and you don't worry about it. But for those of us really looking for Braden Schneider to, maybe become like a superstar because he was taken in the first round, he might fall short of expectations there. I would never rule that out, but another season of him kind of being where he's at. And again, he's a very effective, very solid defenseman, but if he kind of stays at the same level for another season, then I think at this point, it's kind of like, okay, he is what he is. He's somebody that is a second pair kind of guy. I mean, some people would fight me on that and say, Schneider at best is a third pair defenseman. I don't think that's true either. I think certainly he's somebody that can and eventually will become a fixture in the top four. I hope with the Rangers for many years. We'll see how it goes there, but certainly for the not too distant future, he could fill that role for the Rangers, being in a top four defenseman role. But yeah, worst case scenario, he's kind of hit his ceiling already. Best case scenario for Braden Schneider. I think for Schneider, it's him getting an opportunity to play with Adam Fox this season. Now, I don't expect this to happen. I don't even really know that I want it to happen. I mean, I'm open to it. It's an idea. I threw this idea out there last season. I mean, the Rangers were such a mess last year, and they're trying different, line combinations. They're trying different defense pairings, the whole 9 yards. They're trying to figure out anything that's going to work. Nothing obviously worked. But something that we didn't really see last season, and I kind of tossed it out there on social media, was, you know what? Why not try Braden Schneider with Adam Fox? And I realized, they're both right defensemen, but that's never stopped the Rangers in the past. They play left wings at right wing. They play centers at right wing. They play right wings at left wing. They play right defenseman on the left side. We've seen them do plenty of this over the years with multiple different coaches and with multiple different players. So that's never really stopped the Rangers in the past. And I don't know. I just feel like that combination could be very interesting. Fox, obviously the dynamic two-way defenseman. And then Braden Schneider, a little bit from the old school. I mean, he's got some offense to his game, but you think Schneider, you think size, you think physicality, and somebody that's just a steady, consistent defenseman. So for Schneider, I mean, I think that would be a tremendous opportunity to get the chance to play with Adam Fox next season. Obviously, that would also result in his ice time seeing a significant uptick. But conventional wisdom says that it's probably going to be Gavrikov with Fox this upcoming season, and I wouldn't really argue against that either. I did see somebody, though, make a point on social media that I thought was pretty interesting, right? So you bring in Gavrikov, with the idea being that this is somebody that's just very steady, very consistent, doesn't make a lot of mistakes. He's going to go in there, have good positioning, defend the blue line well, just do all the little things that an NHL defenseman has to do to be a productive player, right? And I think, pairing him with Adam Fox, that certainly made sense on paper, especially when you consider that the rest of the defensemen that the Rangers have employed in the top four over the past couple of seasons, they're all gone. No more Lindgren, no more Trouba, no more Miller, and none of them are coming back. So you've kind of had to revamp this blue line, and you go out and you spend the little cap space that you have on Gavrikov, and you bring him in here. I mean, he's got to play on the top pair with Fox, right? Probably yes, but there is some argument to be made that you could go with Schneider there. And then Gavrikov, the steady, consistent defenseman, you could put him with somebody that needs a partner like that more than Adam Fox does. Because with Fox, you figure he can kind of make it work with anybody. But with all that said, I still do lean toward Fox and Gavrikov being together. Would not argue, though, with Schneider playing the left side on the second pair and being paired with Will Borgen. And then you could bump Susie down to the third pairing. Susie struggled last season, clean slate. But I do think that it might be a good idea to kind of gradually get him back into the swing of things with the New York Rangers. He really played poorly last season, did Susie. So you kind of, allow him to get back into the swing of things with a little bit of a lesser role, and you can put Schneider on the second pairing as a way to do that. So, we'll see what happens. But yeah, best case scenario, I mean, I don't hate the idea of Schneider and Fox together, but you guys can let me know what you think about that as well. I think in a worst case scenario, we see some lingering effects from his torn labrum in his shoulder. He played through it last year for what I believe was a decent chunk of the season, and he played in the first 80 games of the season for the Rangers. Then he finally stepped away once the Rangers had been mathematically eliminated from the playoffs with 2 games left, so he didn't play in any of the final 2 games, and I don't remember the exact timeline. I don't remember exactly how many days later it was that he got surgery, but it was pretty quickly after that. It was within a few days, and he got the surgery, and as far as him recuperating from that and getting ready for this upcoming season, it's all been mostly positive news coming from the Rangers. They expect him to be ready to go, but you never know. Can these injuries linger a little bit? Can they compromise him a little bit? And even if the injury doesn't necessarily linger, does the reduced practice time and the reduced preseason games, does that also put Schneider a little bit behind the 8 ball for the start of this upcoming season? That's at least possible, because the Rangers have said that what they're planning on doing right now is Schneider is going to play in 2 of the final 3 games, preseason games, for the Rangers here. So not going to play any of the first 3, obviously. And I don't know if that's like a plan that's set in stone for the Rangers, but I mean, you would like him to play in a few more than 2 games. My understanding is that he's been limited at practice, but it sounds like he did just the other day get to shed the no contact jersey. So my guess is he'll probably be ready, but he's not going to get quite as many reps as some other guys. So a little bit of a concern there, nothing major, but something to keep an eye on, I think, for sure, with Braden Schneider. I think in a best case scenario, Braden Schneider continues to excel in the Swiss Army knife role that he has played so well ever since becoming a New York Ranger. He's going to have a big role this upcoming season, might need to wear a lot of different hats for this Ranger team. He is going to have a lot on his plate. I think his duties are going to include potentially having to move back and forth between the right side and the left side, because if you keep him on the right side, then he's probably going to be on the third pairing, because he's got Fox in front of him and he's got Borgen in front of him. So, I mean, you could do that. I mean, but I just feel like Schneider is kind of graduated, or at least is ready to graduate from third defense pairing. I guess in some ways it's a luxury to have somebody like Schneider on the third pairing. But for me, I got to see him in the top 4. And if that includes him switching sides, then so be it. But that could be a duty of his this upcoming season, to have to switch back and forth between the right side and the left side on an as-needed basis. I don't think there's any chance we'll go through this entire season without Schneider lining up at least a decent amount of times on each side. I mean, he's not going to play all 82 games on the right side or all 82 on the left. He's going to be moving around at least a little bit. And that's something that, is very valuable to this team. It's nice to have some position versatility, and Schneider certainly gives you that. I think also in a best case scenario, he really truly becomes like a go-to defenseman for this Ranger team. He's pretty much going to have to be because, again, they lost guys that they would have had on the ice in big situations in previous seasons. Miller, Lindgren, and Trouba, again, they're all gone. So who's going to be out there at the end of a game when the Rangers are, trying to protect a 1-goal lead? I mean, Fox for sure, Gavrikov for sure. After that, I mean, it's kind of up for grabs. I would say probably Schneider and Borgen will be next in the pecking order. But after that, I mean, there's probably a little bit of a drop-off. Morrow has some promise. I don't think they'll put him into that big of a role that quickly. And then, Vakanainen, I mean, are you going to put him out there necessarily in that kind of a role? Probably not either. So I do think that Schneider is going to be called upon in big spots in big games. And I think certainly he's ready for that. There's also a decent chance, or something of a chance, that Schneider ends up quarterbacking the second power play unit. That's only if Scott Morrow does not make the team. If Morrow makes the Rangers, got to figure that second power play spot is written, has his name written all over it. But if not, there's no obvious selection. And I think Braden Schneider might get that job. I think also Schneider is somebody that is going to be really counted upon to establish a tone for this Ranger team. We've all heard about how, this team wants to play more physical and play more straight line hockey and, do some of the grittier things that maybe they haven't done in the past and play, dish out some big hits, play with some FU, as the new captain, JT Miller, said not too long ago. And Braden Schneider is going to give you that, so he'll be important in that role too. I think also, to stick with this theme of Schneider being the Swiss Army knife, he's going to continue to have to be somebody that's going to have to learn how to play with basically every defenseman on this team. You think about when Schneider was called up, and he was 20 years old when this happened, and he's played 3.5 seasons since then. And his defense partners, I mean, you'll get dizzy trying to remember all of them. I wrote down a decent amount of the names here, but you go from, not necessarily in order here, but you go from Patrick Nemeth, Justin Braun, Eric Gustafsson, K'Andre Miller, even Nils Lundqvist briefly, Zach Jones, Urho Vakanainen, Nico Mikkola, Jacob Trouba every once in a while. I think he was even out there with Libor Hayek for a handful of games. And I want to say maybe just briefly with Carson Soucy a little bit last season. It's hard to remember everything that happened last year, but you get the idea. It's been a revolving door as far as defense partners for Braden Schneider. And as we talked about a little bit earlier in this section, I think that's going to continue because he's going to be changing sides of the ice. He's going to be potentially moving up and down the lineup. And I mean, which defenseman on the Rangers are you like 100% sure that Schneider will not play with this upcoming season? I'm not sure that player exists. He could be out there with anybody. I really do think that's at least possible. So we'll see, but that's been very valuable for the Rangers over the years, and it will continue to be valuable going forward. Braden Schneider just kind of being that, that Swiss Army knife, that guy that can go out there in any situation, play with any defense partner, and typically do a good job in doing so. So that's it for Braden Schneider. In just a second, we're going to shift our attention to Jonathan Quick, who enters his third season with the New York Rangers. We'll discuss his season outlook. Can he continue to defy Father Time? We'll discuss that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you are ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you will get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is the best because it will let you bet however you'd like. There's player props, there you can build a same-game parlay, or you can even jump in live while the action is unfolding. It makes every game a little bit more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it is easy, and it is the best way to add more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, let's go keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Big shout out to the everydayers as always. We've got Islanders at Rangers at 7 o'clock on Thursday. We'll be breaking that down in the next episode. Obviously, a lot riding on this game for a lot of different players in the Rangers, and we'll be back to discuss it in the next one. But for right now, let's shift the attention to Jonathan Quick, the best and worst case scenarios for the legendary goalie. And we'll start again with the worst case scenario. And I think this one's pretty obvious. You guys probably know where I'm going with this. You probably know what I'm about to say, or at least you have an idea. I think in a worst case scenario, it's very simple. Father Time simply finally catches up to Jonathan Quick. This one's pretty self-explanatory. We don't have to spend a ton of time on it. But it's worth pointing out, Jonathan Quick does turn 40 in January. And it does get to a point where no matter who you are, if you're a professional athlete, you will get to a certain age, a certain point in your career where you just can't do it the way that you used to, and you end up, being forced to retire shortly thereafter. I still have hope, Quick, that he can be a solid backup goalie for the New York Rangers, but it's also worth pointing out that Quick clearly in year 2 with the Rangers this past season was not nearly as good as he was in year 1. Or I shouldn't say not nearly, but he was not as good as he was in year 1. And I know the Rangers forgot how to play defense last season. I know the Rangers at times didn't apparently feel like playing defense this past season. But when you look at the stats, his goals against average went from 2.62 in his first season with the Rangers all the way up to 3.17 this past season. And his save percentage went from 911 to 893. Now, the fact that the save percentage, went down or wasn't as good last season is notable, but it's also notable that his save percentage did not fall off by nearly as much of a margin as his goals against average did. And I think that's pretty indicative of the way the Rangers were defending in front of him. I mean, he was stopping almost as many pucks. I mean, we're talking about a difference of 2%. And I realize that's kind of a lot when it comes to goals in the NHL. But at the same time, I think it's pretty solid evidence that the Rangers had basically just non-existent defense this past season when you compare it to the season before that. But as far as the eye test, even there, I didn't think Quick was quite as good this past season as the one before. So again, Father Time's undefeated, but we'll hope that Quick can stave him off for at least one more season here. I think in a best case scenario, Jonathan Quick continues to be a mentor for Igor Shesterkin, as well as the other young goalies that are currently at New York Rangers training camp. We've seen in the past, Igor can get in his own head from time to time. He really, really gets down on himself when he has a bad game, when he has a bad performance, when he has a stretch of games that aren't so good, or he lets in a soft goal or whatever it might be. And on one hand, I mean, it's great to know that he cares that much and that he is that tough on himself. On the other hand, I think there's times where that's to his detriment. There's times where I think Igor has maybe let it snowball a little bit in previous seasons. But I think Quick being there and, not like that he'll teach Igor to accept failure or anything like that, because nobody wants to be told that. And that's obviously not something that Jonathan Quick is going to do or tell somebody else to do, but just maybe understanding a little bit more that there are ups and downs to playing this position. For my money, it's the most challenging, most difficult, most physically and mentally demanding position in all of professional sports. And you might want to fight me on that with this position or that position in this sport or that sport. But yeah, that's my hill. I will definitely go with that one. But it's good to have a veteran and somebody that's done it all and won Stanley Cups like Jonathan Quick that's there to kind of have Igor's back and maybe talk him through some things from time to time. And you can even extend that to the other young goalies in Ranger camp right now. Dylan Garand, Talon Boyko, the two of them are still in camp. They can benefit from Jonathan Quick's teachings as well. I mean, some of these guys were in diapers when Quick was getting started in his NHL career. And I mean, who would not listen to Jonathan Quick if you're in a position like, a Garand or a Boyko, a young goalie just in general? I just get the feeling when he talks, you're going to do everything you can to be a sponge and soak it all up and learn everything that you can from him. Whether we're talking about techniques in the crease or just the mental side of hockey, certainly, young goalies can learn from Jonathan Quick. And in a best case scenario, Quick will continue to be a mentor for, Igor and certainly, the other young goalies in the Rangers system. In a worst case scenario, I think as far as physically on the ice, we see evidence of Jonathan Quick's lateral movement declining. And it probably has already begun to at least a certain degree, because I just don't think you can move across the crease at 39 the same way you can when you're 25. But we've seen this in the past. We sort of saw it with Henrik Lundqvist. When he started slowing down in his last season or two with the Rangers, I felt like that was the first thing to go. We had a situation where he just couldn't get from one side of the net to the other side nearly as fast as he used to be able to. And it's got to be frustrating as a goalie, because you're a veteran and you've been through everything and you've seen everything and you know the game and you see the game probably better than you ever have before. And yet your body just can't do the things that it used to be able to. I don't think that's exclusive to Lundqvist or Quick or anybody else. I just get the feeling, watching hockey over the years, that's one of the first things to go. You're there as far as the mental side of the game, and you're a grizzled veteran and you know what it takes. But again, you just can't physically do the things that you used to be able to do. And one of the biggest examples of that to me, and something that will stand out if it declines sharply, is that lateral movement, that side-to-side movement in the crease. I think in a best-case scenario, though, for Jonathan Quick, he comes up clutch for the Rangers when they really need him. And it will happen. I really get the feeling there's going to be a point this season where the Rangers, at least a little bit, are going to have to lean on Jonathan Quick for at least a short stretch of games here or there. You really can't hide your backup goalie anymore in the NHL because the days of the franchise goalies playing, 76, 77, 78 games in a season, those are long gone. And I don't think they're coming back. And that's probably for the better because you don't want to run these guys into the ground. I mean, I know that the goalies that did that and put together Hall of Fame careers, I'm sure those guys fought to be on the ice every single night. And there's probably guys in the game right now that would do the same thing. But again, you have to save these guys from themselves every once in a while. I mean, we've seen multiple Ranger coaches use the strategy of going with each of their goalies in a back-to-back situation. It's pretty rare we've seen over the last handful of years here for Igor to play both games of a back-to-back. Whoever the backup is, whether it's Quick or Halak or Georgiev or anybody else, they've tended to, step in for one of the two games of the back-to-back. And I think we'll see that more going forward as well. But with all that said, the Rangers are going to need Jonathan Quick at some point because we've seen over the past couple of seasons, Igor has had a couple of injuries, nothing ever too serious, nothing that ever keeps him out of the lineup for a long-term situation. But there have been stretches, couple of games here and there, 3 games here, 4 games there over the last couple of seasons where Igor suffers a relatively minor injury, but he has to come out of the lineup. And we don't know what's going to happen with the Rangers this season. It could be a photo finish as far as them making the playoffs or not. But if that is the case and Igor does have to miss time, then the Rangers are going to need Jonathan Quick to come through in a big, big way. And I think he will because that's just who he is. That's who he's been as a goalie throughout his entire NHL career. Even if he's not the same level that he once was, he'll figure out a way to hold it down for the Rangers, hold down the fort while Igor Shesterkin is out. But, I mean, there could be an injury to Igor, like we just said. There could be a situation where Igor gets into a little bit of a funk. We saw that a couple of seasons ago, actually just 2 seasons ago when the Rangers were on top of the world in the regular season, winning the President's Trophy. But Igor was struggling a little bit. And we had a situation where the Rangers said, okay, you're going to sit down for a couple of games. You're going to work with Benoit Allaire. Quick's going to start, a handful of games in a row. And Quick ended up starting 3 straight games and played well in all of them. So there could be a similar situation like that this season as well. Or, knock on wood here, but if Jonathan Quick has to be out there for a playoff game, I said this when the Rangers signed Jonathan Quick in free agency a few years ago. If there's a situation like that where Igor's not available for a playoff game due to an injury, then I will take my chances with Jonathan Quick, who's been there and done that, being able to turn back the clock a couple of years, or maybe even more than a couple, and do something special in a playoff game. I really do think the Rangers are better off with Quick than any other, viable backup goalie in the NHL in such a situation. But sooner or later, the Rangers are going to need Quick. And even if none of those situations come to be, even as a leader behind the scenes, the Rangers have raved about his leadership. 2 years ago in the playoffs, they got that marathon, multiple overtime game against the Canes, and he's back there telling everybody, keep going. We got to get this one. We're going to get this one. All this good stuff. So I'm happy that Quick is back. Never thought when the Rangers signed him that he would be here for 3 years, and maybe even more. I mean, who's to say for sure? Maybe he signs another 1-year extension in the middle of the season and has another solid year. We will see. But either way, happy Jonathan Quick is back. And, just being able to do things like that, stepping in when the Rangers need him, that's what Jonathan Quick can bring to the table as much as anything this upcoming season. But in just a minute, going to keep everything rolling, going to shift our attention to a forward, and that would be Brett Berard. Will he make the team this upcoming season? We'll discuss that in just a second. All right, let's go wrap up today's episode by talking a little bit about Brett Berard and the best and worst case scenarios for the young Ranger forward this upcoming season. We'll start with the worst case scenario. Worst case, he doesn't make the team. Plain and simple, just doesn't make the team out of training camp. Now, I don't think there's any way that he doesn't see time with the Rangers this upcoming season, but as far as breaking camp with the New York Rangers, that could go either way. I still think there's a better chance he makes it than doesn't make it. And really, when you look at the forwards that we've been referring to on here as the big 3, Berard, Gabe Perreault, Brennan, Othmann, you could make the argument, and I think a pretty strong argument, and I think I would make this argument, that Berard might have the inside track of all 3 of them to make this team out of training camp. You look at Brennan Othmann in the preseason opener, very shaky against the Devils, basically had an afternoon to forget there in New Jersey. Gabe Perreault, I mean, there's more upside, I think, with Perreault than Berard, but he's just getting started. I mean, he just turned pro at the end of last season, played 5 games with the Rangers. I know he already made his NHL debut, but I still do not dislike the fact. In fact, I like the fact or the idea that Perreault can start this upcoming season with the Hartford Wolfpack. I think more seasoning would be good for him. You use the Wolfpack as a little bit of a bridge between college and the NHL, and you call him up when you decide that he's ready and when you figure out, what his role is going to be when he's called up. So with all that said, Brett Berard of the 3 of them, he's the guy that looks like he's ready to go. He's the guy that I think looks the most NHL ready, at least right now, out of the 3 of them. But it's no guarantee. Even if he does have the inside track on Othmann and Perreault, it's possible there is a world where none of the 3 of them make the Rangers roster going into camp. There's only so many spots to go around, and there's fierce competition right now for basically all of the bottom 6. We've got the big 3 that we just mentioned, the 3 prospects, Perreault, Othmann, Berard. Then you've got Carrick, Edstrom, and Rempe. That could be your 4th line right there, but there could be some competition going on there as well. And then you've got Radish, and you've got Parsonen, and you've got Brodzinski, you've got Sheary, maybe even another prospect like Dylan Robrick, Noah Laba. It's at least possible. We'll see if those guys are in the mix, if one of them can defy the odds and crack the roster. But that's a lot of competition. And so it is possible that Berard has to start the season in the AHL. I hope he makes it. I feel like he's ready, and I'd like to see him in a top 9 role, but no guarantees. And I think for Berard, that's a worst-case scenario for him. He does not make the Rangers out of camp. I think in a best-case scenario, Berard becomes one of the big-time players that are going to fit this new direction of Ranger hockey. He's a perfect fit for the direction that the Rangers want to take. We've heard this, honestly, for, certainly at least a year, probably longer than that. But the Rangers, they need to play more North and South hockey. They need to be more physical. They need to be nastier. They need to be more difficult to play against. The phrase that we used earlier in today's episode that JT Miller mentioned the other day, the Rangers need to play with more FU. Brett Berard seemingly would fit that to a T. Now, I realize he's not the biggest guy on the ice, not by a long shot. He is 5'9", 175 pounds. But anybody that's watched this guy play, you guys are very well aware of the fact that he plays bigger than his frame. He can be an absolute pest out there. He can certainly get under the skin of some of his opponents. And he'll throw his body around. Again, he doesn't have the biggest frame, but he will hit, he will forecheck, he will play north-south hockey. He had 53 hits in 35 games this past season as a rookie for the New York Rangers, and he did that while averaging only 10 minutes and 43 seconds of ice time per night. So when this guy's out there, he's looking to mix it up. He's looking to deliver hits. He's looking to do some of the dirty work in the corners, and that is what the Rangers need more of going forward. So I think in a best-case scenario, he fits this new movement for the Rangers absolutely perfectly, and I think there's a decent chance that could happen. Worst-case scenario for Berard, let's say he does make the team, but he's buried on the 4th line and his ice time suffers. We just got done talking about all the different, players that are gunning for one of those bottom 6 spots on the roster, right? And there are a lot of them. So even if Berard does make the team, if he's fortunate enough and he goes out there and puts his best foot forward and makes the Rangers take notice and ends up cracking the opening night roster, I would personally like to see him in the top 9, but there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. A lot of those guys that I just mentioned are certain candidates for a top 9 role, and Berard could be the odd man out and end up on the 4th line for the New York Rangers. I think generally speaking in the NHL, you do want to keep your young prospects off of the 4th line. And I realize, this past season, we had both Edstrom and Rempe there, but I think it's a little bit different with the 2 of them. They've never been highly productive offensive players at any level, and obviously they're both very big, and they can both, dish out some big hits as well, Rempe in particular. But somebody like Berard, it wouldn't be the worst thing ever if he's on the 4th line, because I certainly think he can play that style of hockey and give you what you need as far as a 4th liner is concerned. But if you really want to get him going, you really want him to hit the ground running, a top 9 role is where he needs to be. And in a worst case scenario, he's not able to earn that, or maybe he does earn that, but the coaches want to go with the veteran there, like Taylor Radish on the 3rd line, or whatever it might be. But yeah, worst case scenario for Brett Berard, he just can't quite get into that, top 9 role this upcoming season. I think in a best case scenario, Berard becomes a bona fide sniper for the New York Rangers. I feel like he's got something of an underrated shot. There were a couple of times last year, and Berard only scored 6 goals. So take this with a grain of salt. It's not a massive sample size. But when you look at the goals that he scored last season, a couple of different times, they were sort of just out of nowhere goals. And he scored by just having a great shot. They didn't necessarily look like excellent scoring chances, he's at kind of a sharp angle or he's going up the left side and he just scores and he beats the goalie clean. He seems to have a very strong, very accurate wrist shot, and he's been able to take advantage of it both with the Rangers and other stops in his hockey career. So that's something that the Rangers kind of lack. We joke around how this team tries to pass the puck into the back of the net and it never works. We need a couple more snipers. We need a couple more guys that are going to shoot the puck first and foremost. And when you look at what he did with the Rangers this past season, 59 shots on goal, 6 goals. That is a shooting percentage of 10.2%. Now, that's probably not sustainable, but it also is evidence, small sample size, though it may be, that this guy can shoot the puck, and he needs to shoot the puck going forward, and that's one of the biggest things that he can do to help the New York Rangers. It's also worth pointing out that it is not uncommon for Berard to finish a season with more goals than assists, whether that's with the Rangers or anybody else. Now, again, last season, small sample size with the Rangers, but technically he did just that. He had 6 goals and 4 assists. And then his last full season with the Wolfpack, the season before that, 25 goals, 23 assists in 21 games. And I realize goal to assist ratio, that's not going to tell you everything about a certain player, but it gives you an idea that this guy does have that shoot first mentality, and everything else being equal, I'm going to rip it at the net and see what happens and trust my shot and maybe beat the goalie clean, as we saw him do, like I said, a couple of times for the Rangers this past season. And that's a good thing because, as we mentioned earlier, the Rangers need more players with that shoot first mentality, or at least a little bit more of a shoot first mentality, not pass. You can't pass the puck into the back of the net, as we just covered. So Berard can really help them in that area, give them potentially, a bona fide sniper on this team, which again, they need more of. So figure we can call it there for today. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchick17. Once again, @jchik17. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.